question that everybody asks homeschoolers, what about socialization? There is an element of me that wants to say, not an issue.
Yeah.
However, there is an element of socialization that they wouldn't get with other kids their age. I think that there's always a balance. I mean, the kids that are in a traditional school, they're not getting the same experiences as my kids. So who's to say, which is better?
Welcome to Quality Matters, where we speak with experts across industries to see how their perspectives can inform our pursuit of high-quality education for all students. I'm Shaka, and this is Caitlin. And we hope you'll subscribe to this channel so that you never miss a conversation.
Like you, Shaka and I are passionate about all students having access to a great education, and quality is a driving force behind our work. But what does quality really mean? In an era where parents can customize their child's education, this question is more important than ever.
During each session, we'll hear from leaders in education, technology, business, sports, and the arts. We hope to apply their insights to our pursuit of a great education in the K-12 space.
Follow us on your favorite platform and join us to secure a great education for all children. This is Quality Matters.
All right, Caitlin, we now get to have a conversation with someone from a field that obviously is still within education, but where we haven't had a whole lot of exposure. We are joined today by Sydney Miller Milbert. She is with Gifted and Twice Exceptional Homeschoolers. So Sydney, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Yeah, well, we're excited too. One of the things that I wonder if we could just get you to share a little bit with our audience and even educate us. When we're talking about twice exceptional learners, but twice exceptional homeschoolers, what does that twice exceptional mean? Help us to understand that phrase.
Okay, so maybe we should start with gifted first.
Great.
Okay, so every state pretty much has their own definition for gifted. However, there's a nationwide organization called the National Association for Gifted Children. There's a few sentences that make up their official definition, but to sum it up in just a few words, a gifted student is a student who has high academic potential. And that potential means that they may not have all A's. They may not be the top of their class. They may not be the president of their student council or things like that. But they have the cognitive ability to be critical thinkers, to be creative problem solvers, to think of things in ways that other people, whether they're their same age peers or not, may not. And then the twice exceptional piece is someone who is gifted, child or not, could be an adult, who is gifted and also has a learning disability or a challenge of some type. So they might be dyslexic, they might be on the autism spectrum, they might have ADHD, could be any number of things.
That's really helpful. Can you help us give us a sense? I don't know if this is even documented, but are there estimates for the number of students who fall into this sort of twice exceptional kind of learners category around the country?
I don't have an exact number. The Washington Post and SCAR School in the DC area did a poll of parents in 2023, I believe, where they sort of broke it down by those students, families who are still in the public school system and otherwise, and then specifically homeschoolers. And they asked the homeschool families what their reasons were for making that choice.
Yeah.
30% of them said that the school couldn't or wouldn't meet their child's needs.
Wow.
So that could be someone who is, just has a learning disability. I said just, not as in like it's one thing, but it's just that. Or it could be someone who is gifted and they couldn't give them enough challenge, or it could be someone who is twice exceptional. So it's a pretty big portion of those homeschool families, but I don't know nationwide. It's really hard too because there's this concept of masking also. So you could have a child who is gifted, and so they can sort of like mask, they can cover up a learning disability. So you wouldn't know that they have that they're dyslexic or something like that. Or it could be a child who is sort of masking the other way, and their learning disability is sort of like hiding their high cognitive ability.
So this is super interesting, and those definitions were really helpful because, like we said, this is certainly not a space that I have a lot of familiarity with, which is interesting because we have all of these conversations about individualized instruction and unique student profiles and meeting the needs of students with different education models. And this gifted and twice exceptional homeschoolers, like, it seems to me that that's really what you guys are living out. You're living out those efforts. in your work and sort of along the lines of meeting the needs of students, individuality, how are you able to right now be doing that most successfully? Are there certain strategies that you're employing across the board in your work, or do they really vary depending on the needs? How are you guys creating success?
So it varies. I homeschool my own children, and then I also teach other families' children through a couple of different organizations. For my own kids, I will say that I sort of like pick and choose. So I will use a math curriculum that meets the needs of my 13-year-old. He's doing a high school program at 13, so he's advanced in there, but he wasn't always that fast, or for a long time, he had trouble with handwriting. So we used an elementary school like cursive program to get him there. So it's really about sort of like making things work for where they're at. And it's not, I think some people may be familiar, if you're at all familiar with sort of like homeschool curriculums, there's this idea of like an all-in-one where you can get like all the subjects, pay for the box, it gets delivered to your house, you have everything for the whole school year.
Yeah.
For these kids, it doesn't usually work. Usually you need some things at a higher level and some things maybe at their level or their age level. And sometimes it's even something that's below their age level. But for the classes that I teach, it's, I would say it's kind of self-selecting, if that makes sense. So I teach pretty specific classes. For example, I developed a class it's a history class, but it's through the lens of graphic design. And so I taught graphic design, before it was a term all the way back from the Stone Age to modern times. We've talked about tools and techniques and all sorts of things. And the kids that signed up for my class are those that were interested. And so you meet the needs of kids through their interests and also through their strengths. So there may be kids that did all the projects with markers and pencils, and some who did things with a digital tool, even though it's graphic design and you may not think of it that way. I try to build my classes in a way that it's flexible and interest driven.
If you don't mind, I have one more follow-up question.
Please.
Just because this is different than a lot of what we hear about, and certainly what my familiarity is in some of these spaces. So you have a lot of autonomy over sort of choosing these different classes and these different interests to sort of pursue, and this idea of self-selected, like that's awesome. That's really interesting. Are there certain I'm assuming there are, so maybe the better question is, what are the considerations at large, systemically, or in accordance with other programming and academic measures that you consider or that you take into account when you're developing these programs, when you're setting out to, choose a history class, but do it through the lens of graphic design, when you're choosing your handwriting class for your own child, but meeting, their specific needs? Like what are those consistent considerations you have to keep in mind to make sure you're covering your bases?
Well, so I think maybe it's important to think about homeschoolers as a diverse group. And so there are, of course, sort of the conservative, maybe faith-based homeschoolers that you may think of as like the stereotypical homeschooler. Okay. But and those folks may look for a faith-based curriculum, and that includes things like science and history. But for those who are not faith-based in their homeschooling and do it for other reasons, like because the school can't meet their child's academic or social, emotional, or whatever those needs are, for myself, I want to make sure that from a quality perspective, that science is secular, history is secular, and from diverse voices. And so the history that we talk about in my own home and things like the classes that I develop, I try to make sure that I look for diverse perspectives, include those in the things that we talk about and explore. And science needs to be based on the real scientific method.
Okay, so one of the curiosities I have about this space, and I think it's kind of piggybacking off of Caitlin's question, and that is, when you're thinking about maybe a target level of, say, mastery in a particular subject, are there considerations that you think about in this sort of twice exceptional space where you're, when you're identifying kind of a finish line of sorts that are different from how you might for more typical learners, and that we would expect to see in kind of the conventional public school system. How do you also work maybe with parents to help identify, like, for their unique child, hey, here's what our goal is. In 9 months we want to be here, or 6 months we want to be here, or whatever. What are some of the ways in which you do that goal setting?
That's a really good question. It's hard in the teaching space that I'm in, because the classes that I teach are so very specific, and so they'll come to me, and I do interact with parents in that way a little bit, but they usually come to me for a specific interest.
Okay.
And so for example, I also host this like Minecraft club, which the kids love, but it's not academic. It's for them to sort of build relationships with kids who are like them. It makes them feel safe and happy, and that's a big part of them being able to learn. And so there aren't necessarily like measurable goals in a space like that, but it sort of builds on the learning ecosystem, if that makes sense,
yes,
to support other things. So while everyone in that Minecraft club may be doing a different math program, they can still be friends and talk about something that they do have in common.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true in a lot of different homeschool spaces, gifted or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And now I want to think a little bit about what other supports are there for families, because I have to imagine that this space has changed a lot in the past, even 10 years. And I'm thinking kind of about two things, maybe three things. I'm thinking about the networks that exist. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about funding, and I know there are some states in which families can receive funding if they want to kind of have their own customized experience, like Florida, you can do that, and some other states. So I'm thinking some about that, and then I'm also thinking about what advances maybe technologically and kind of with the tools that allow for this, because 30 years ago, for most families in the country, it was kind of your option was your zone public school, and it was like, dinner time at the Mitchell house, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. But we know that sometimes you need to throw a fit if it's not working for your child, right? That doesn't work. So anyway, what changes have you seen? How are do those things like change the ecosystem for families?
Yeah, I mean, I think that technology absolutely is a driver, mm-hmm. but so in my local area in Virginia, I started a homeschool co-op that was in person in 2018, I think, and then we after 2 years, we finally had this amazing space. So that was 2020, and COVID shut us down. And the families that were in my co-op didn't want to move online. And so we had very sporadic sort of book clubby type events, but we lost our momentum in person, but we gained we gained this huge sort of diversity in what we did online instead. And so we sought out other educational providers, I guess you would say. Mm-hmm. And my kids got to connect with people all over the world, actually, more so than ever before. And it's certainly technology based. I mean, that's awesome. Yeah. So they take classes with kids in many time zones and different countries and different languages. And that is definitely something I couldn't have provided at a local level.
Yeah.
So such great positives, pros coming from all of these things you're sharing with us. We know no role in education, no model in education is without its challenges. I get the sense that you're in a unique position to address the challenges with this autonomy and sort of, unique ownership over your specific curriculums, et cetera, schedule, all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that also poses challenges. So long-winded way of saying, what are some of the difficulties or the challenges that you guys in the homeschooling world at large, but also in your unique experience, have faced?
That's a great question. I think that I mean, there's this sort of question that everybody asks homeschoolers, what about socialization, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there is an element to that of me that wants to say not an issue. Like they do, like right now my kids are in Cambridge with their dad, my husband, exploring history of Boston and everything, and so they're socializing with everybody around them.
Yeah.
However, there is an element of socialization that they wouldn't get with other kids their age, and so that is a real challenge, and I don't know how to solve it. But I think that there's always a balance. I mean, the kids that are in a traditional school, they're not getting the same experiences as my kids. So who's to say,
right,
which is better?
And for the record, I have met and maybe been one, but there are plenty of socially awkward kids in large comprehensive schools, right? So, frankly, some might say middle school, all of middle school, but yeah. Yeah, but it's a challenge. Yeah, what other things pose particular challenges?
I think as a teacher, it's hard, as an online teacher in particular, it's hard to connect with all students in a meaningful way, especially those that are twice exceptional and face things like anxiety. They're nervous to, say, turn on their web camera or talk in their microphone, and it's really hard to know if you're reaching them. Sometimes you are, and they'll submit like a really amazing project, and you'll be like, okay, where did that come from?
Yeah, that's awesome.
But cool, that's great.
Sure.
And sometimes you just never know. And that's really hard as a teacher because you feel like, at least I feel like I'm sort of putting my heart into something, and I really do want to reach these kids, and that's hard. Yeah.
Some of these challenges, or specifically what you were describing about the opportunity to go out into the world, and right now your kids and your family are exploring Cambridge and they're traveling with you, and they're getting great exposure to new and interesting things. It's kind of been a theme of these conversations so far at this conference, activating like the engagement and passion piece of students to like really trigger their learning and to really sort of instigate that like personal ownership that students start feeling over their learning. Do you see a lot of that? I guess one more piece of context. Sometimes people feel that sort of traditional schooling doesn't have the same opportunity to give kids the access to transfer their skills they're learning in a classroom to the real world. They don't always make those connections super succinctly. And so people are trying lots of different ways. But in the homeschooling world, do you feel that your kids have those triggers and those instigators and those connections where they're actually applying what they're learning in school and in their classes immediately to the real world in a way that deepens their engagement?
Yeah, I do. I think that it depends on the subject, of course.
Yeah.
So for my own kids, we've sort of been road tripping up the East Coast this past week to get here this week. So we did Mystic Seaport, and they talked to a blacksmith, and then we went to the grist mill here in Plymouth, and they sort of like did a physics lesson on the gears, and so it's like a real life application of things that they're learning in their classes.
Cool.
And I think that, again, it depends. They're not going to apply everything, of course, right? But certainly there are sort of real life opportunities. I have kids in some of my classes that have taken and have told me that they've taken what they've done and used it in another class. So it's not like a professional opportunity, certainly, but it's something that they're taking and sort of internalizing.
Yeah.
And then keeping it with them and using it in a different way. And I think that's pretty interesting to see.
Right. That digestion of the information and then the application or the reapplication in different settings.
Yeah.
And it's their onus. Like they have decided this is where I'm going to reapply it, and sort of they've made those decisions, which is really neat.
They've decided it's important enough for them to pursue as well, which is it's nice.
Exactly.
Well, you even mentioned your this Minecraft class that you're teaching. I mean, that to me is a very similar experience. I mean, where kids can do something in this online space, in a game, really. But some of it absolutely will transpose into the real world, or whether it's design, whether it's how they're thinking about things, and creatively, whether it's building whatever. But they're doing a lot of things that can transfer.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it's not that they would become an architect or something, maybe they will, but it's just the problem solving of like figuring out the tools and maybe the coding that goes along with it that could apply to other things, for sure.
Yeah. I have one more question before we sort of close out our time. You know, at the American Federation for Children, we think a lot about making sure every child has meaningful access to the educational setting that works best for them. One of the sort of questions that we get a lot from policymakers when they're thinking about starting a new choice program, and lots of choice programs have started over the years, of course, but when they think about it, because the homeschool space, and then certainly the twice exceptional homeschool space, is really new to them and different to them, they have a hard time understanding the costs involved. They also have a hard time determining, well, how do we know that that setting is good and is sort of high quality? How would you explain to legislators, hey, here's what some of the costs are, or that some of the cost considerations, and by the way, here are some of the measures of success that you might look to, even though it's going to look different than in a conventional public school?
Yeah. I think that, so when you think about costs, and I'm not an expert on this, but when you think about costs in a public school, there's like a per student amount, right?
Sure.
And then for someone who is maybe using special education services, there's an additional cost, right? Because homeschooling is primarily done by the parent, whether or not they're using a class like mine or an in-person class in their local area or whatever, those sorts of per child costs don't really apply in the same way. For someone, for example, who is dysgraphic, so they can't write very well, or they have trouble writing well, there's all kinds of tools that you can just use on a smartphone that would allow them to speak, and it writes for them, types for them. And that's, I mean, it could be free, it could be a really inexpensive app. And so what a school might purchase as a very expensive license becomes like a $5.99 app, $5.99. So the costs on a family, while not nothing, can be done in a much more affordable way, I would say.
Though I've got to think there is an opportunity cost. It's certainly if a parent is the one providing that education, right? Because you could be, you could be in a private sector, pure private sector job doing something else.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. And I would say that many homeschool families do have a either stay-at-home parent or a part-time working parent at home, but there are those that do find a way to make it work as both full-time working parents. There's a lot of schedule juggling, there's a lot of sort of relying on a community, but it's not always paid. Sometimes there's sort of like shared responsibility. So maybe a family would have their kids at someone's house when they're doing their work, and they would swap off.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Such an interesting conversation, and such neat work that you're doing, that you're engaged in, that you're running out of your own home with the gifted and twice exceptional homeschoolers. So thank you for being on this conversation and sharing all of this information with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
We appreciate it.
All right, Caitlin, we just had a great conversation, super informative, with Sydney Miller Milbert. She works with gifted and twice exceptional homeschoolers. I learned a lot. That's not a space that I'm super familiar with, and so it was helpful for me to think about kind of these layers of exceptionality and trying to customize the educational experience in multiple dimensions. So I'm glad that she's doing that work. It's also pretty complicated work, it seems to me.
Yeah.
But, I wonder what from the conversation struck you. And, I also wonder, from your teaching experience, can you think about students who probably fell into that category, whether or not they were diagnosed, but who were probably in that gifted and twice exceptional, category?
Yes, for sure. As a teacher, I can think of that. I can think of experiences where I worked in a school that was able to give kids a lot of support, but even still, I don't know that every student who had different learning styles or who had different, learning needs was able to have every bit of their needs met. when I was the teacher, I had 22 kids. You know, you can only do so much.
Yeah.
And I considered it important to meet the needs of my students and to individualize instruction as best as I could. So that was a consideration. But even still, you're limited by the fact that you have that many.
I mean, this is a little bit of your story, your own educational story, right? It's sort of like working through some like early struggles,
Yeah.
having the capacity, but you got to find the, like, what's the right kind of, the right key to unlock this learning for the student.
The right key is having informed parents who can advocate and sort of mix and match and puzzle together to deliver what you need.
Yeah.
Is how I feel, and which is why I think it's so important to empower parents with as much information as possible, whether it's applicable to their specific situation or not. Just having that information, having access, knowing where they can find it is crucial, because yes, I had lots of different learning style needs and difficulties and disabilities, and I had parents that could navigate sort of the scene and where I was living and where I was going to school, and I ended up going to different schools to sort of meet the needs of some of those. All of what you just brought up, what Sydney spoke about, this idea of personalization, of meeting specific needs and interests, I thought it was interesting how she took it to sort of this next level with the personalization that she puts into the curriculum planning and the curriculum design and the offerings she's giving to not just her kids but other kids. That I have always recognized as a pro to these emerging models, homeschool, micro schools, you know, these smaller, nimble, agile models. What were your thoughts when she was talking about the Minecraft or the history lesson through graphic design? Like, how did you react to or like feel about all of that flexibility? Pros, cons?
Yeah, I think so. Let me say unequivocally, I appreciate the flexibility. I appreciate that. I think that it's really hard to conceive of all the possible permutations of what a customized education can look like, because it can look like infinitely different. And so I think that's where we get into a little bit of trouble trying to assess, especially in the homeschool space, because it's so dispersed. You've got, I mean, even more than the micro schools. We've talked a lot on Quality Matters with folks who are in the micro school space. So even more than that, at least a micro school, you've got, 15, 20, 30 kids.
Yeah.
Well, you're dividing that by 10.
Right.
And so now we're talking about in the homeschooled space, groups of 2 kids, 3 kids, with each with a customized experience. And what are they doing? Every day looks different. And so in some ways, I'm like, man, that flexibility is awesome. As a parent, I also think that sounds a little bit exhausting.
Yeah.
I think about every summer when my kids are home from school, and that first week of summer break is always brutal, because kids are like, hey, Mom, Dad, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? And I'm like, you're going to go outside and go find something to do. Find something to do.
We're going to practice entertaining ourselves.
Yeah, we're going to practice agency.
Yeah.
Right? So it's hard for me to fathom what that's like over the course of an entire year and curating those experiences. But last thing I'll say on it is I appreciated that Sydney, even in her road trip with her family up from Virginia up to where we are right now, we're recording in Cambridge outside Boston, she was making stops on that trip meaningful. So part of it is just the intentionality.
Yeah.
And so even though things like Minecraft, it may not be an academic goal, she still had some goals. She wanted to see her students engaging with one another. I would probably say engaging constructively and respectfully with one another. So she still had some goals.
Yeah.
So I think we ought not confuse lack of academic outcomes with lack of goals, because those are different things.
Okay, so I'm going to step outside a little bit of this conversation and is there a balance between meeting the needs of individual students with individual instruction and equipping students to live in a world where they are not the center of the world? So how do you balance making sure kids are supported in their education and that they are independently considered as an individual, but then also make sure that sometimes acclimating to an environment, acclimating to a situation is required in the world from everybody to some extent? Is school not the place where you teach that flexibility, or is school the place where you teach that flexibility but you just do it in different ways outside of instruction? Because we believe fully in individuality and meeting the needs of individual students. One size fits all. It doesn't actually fit all because there ends up being a lot of problems. So one size does not work for everybody.
Right.
And I don't know, I'm not going to put words into your mouth, but I am a believer that sometimes you got to just get in line and sort of follow what's happening, because the world can't revolve solely around you.
Listen,
so
I
don't
mean,
know.
the stone said it. You can't always get what you want.
Right.
But if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need.
Right.
Okay, so I think part of the question is, how do we have a customized experience, one that really is engaging students, but doesn't coddle them so much that, to your point, they think that they are the sort of selfish center of the universe.
That's right.
And that everything has to cater to their desires, because that's never going to be the rest of the world. I mean, I'm not a child development expert. You might be soon. Actually, I know
Shortly.
you're studying that. But it strikes me, though, that I'll say this. I think many folks in the homeschool community are finding that balance. So far be it from me to say what the components are, but I will say, in my experience, I know a lot of homeschool families, and I mean, they are great families. Like, their kids are well behaved and well mannered. Like, I can't think of a homeschool family in my universe
Right.
where I'm like, oh, those kids are really selfish and don't care about their community. Quite the opposite. So they're getting it right somehow.
And I agree. When I think of, a lot of these emerging models that focus on independence, individuality, uniqueness, meeting the needs, I also can't think of a situation where, because they are entertaining or engaged in a certain school model that meets their needs, they think the world revolves around them. So I think that the argument could be made that that's just not, there's checks and balances that are taking place that are currently keeping the scale balanced.
Even if we don't know how to articulate it exactly, or at least you and I aren't articulating the why we see it happening. So that's encouraging. I think maybe a place to stop and kind of ask our audience is, what's been your experience kind of in the gifted and twice exceptional space? Maybe not with homeschoolers, but just like, how are those students being served? What are some ways that you've seen work? What are some ways that have not worked? Because I do think there's a lot of kids that fall into that category. They go underreported.
For sure.
And therefore underserved. And we want to make sure that education's working well for all kids.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Shaka, another great conversation. Thanks for the insightful breakdown. And I'll catch you next time.
All right, see ya.